Hey, everybody. Since I've been doing these conversations, I've had a bunch of requests to create a podcast. So I'm doing it. That'll make it easier for you guys to listen if you don't want to watch on Facebook or YouTube or something like that. The show is going to be called Community Spread, and it's going to be about the share of progressive ideas in conservative neighborhoods. And it's going to be told through conversations with people in vulnerable communities. So as you guys know, these first ones have been about conversations with people in our Black community and what they've been dealing with. And it may expand from there and cover other communities as well. But at the beginning of every podcast, I'm just going to start with something I'm learning about and something I've been thinking about. So today, it is John Lewis, who just passed at 80 years old. He's the congressman of Georgia. But he's so much more than a congressman, really a civil rights icon. And I've been learning about his life and his legacy. I've been learning about this concept of nonviolent suffering that I just found fascinating. And it goes back to 1961 in what they called the Freedom Rides. And many of you probably know all this history, but hey, I'm just Kev, learning over here. But the Freedom Rides were protests against segregation that had been deemed illegal already by the Supreme Court, but was still happening in the South. And so what would happen is Black folks and some white folks would get on a bus and they would travel to the Deep South, and they would ride into cities like Mobile, Alabama. And when they'd get there, they'd be met with mobs. And I want to share with you some of his words on this particular ride into Montgomery, Alabama. And in here, he uses the N-word, and I'm going to use it too because they're John Lewis's words. But this is what he said. The terminal seemed nearly deserted. But then, out of nowhere, from every direction, came people, white people, men, women, and children, dozens of them, hundreds of them, out of alleys, out of side streets, around the corners of office buildings. They emerged from everywhere, from all directions, all at once, as if they'd been let out of a gate. They carried every makeshift weapon imaginable: baseball bats, wooden boards, bricks, chains, tire irons, pipes, and even garden tools, hoes and rakes. One group had women in front, their faces twisted in anger, screaming, "Get them niggers, get them niggers." And now they turned to us, this sea of people, more than 300 of them shouting and screaming, men swinging fists and weapons, women swinging heavy purses, little children clawing with their fingernails at the faces of anyone they could reach. I can't imagine that scene. John Lewis didn't meet violence with violence. He would just get beaten. He was arrested over 40 times. And at the time, what I find interesting is that he was even at odds with other establishment members of the civil rights movement. Thurgood Marshall, for example, who would later go on to be a Supreme Court justice, was kind of against these. He's just like, we're putting Black lives at harm, and this is dangerous, and it's not going to get much done. But the videos and the images of those freedom rides quickly led to the desegregation of public transport and to other advancements of desegregation as a direct result of freedom rides and other movements. Later on, John Lewis goes on to give a speech at the March on Washington, and there's a draft of his speech which he had some very inflammatory language in. He's a 23-year-old man at this point and on fire, and Martin Luther King and others hold him back a little bit. And the lesson I can learn from this is that activists are made to make you feel uncomfortable. And so when you look at the protests, and if you're uncomfortable, that's their goal. And we need to feel uncomfortable. If we're going to move, if we're going to create a more just society, we must feel uncomfortable. I know we all want to give hugs and we all want to feel moderate, but activists, that's not their job. So we need to thank those activists. We have lots of them in our community who are out there doing this work. And if it makes you uncomfortable, it's because they're supposed to. So, John Lewis, was integral in creating the Civil Rights Act of 1965, as he led the march in Selma at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and was beaten, had his skull fractured, and the images from that went national, and people that wanted to look away couldn't anymore. And that led to Black people actually getting the right to vote, which they'd supposed to have for almost 90 years at that point. But there were all these laws in place that made it so, if you were Black and you'd go to register to vote, they'd make you take a test. How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? And if you couldn't answer that question, then you didn't get to vote. And the Civil Rights Act made that illegal. But that Civil Rights Act has actually been gutted by the Supreme Court in a decision in 2013. And we have seen states roll back the rights of Black people to vote. And so this needs to be part of John Lewis's legacy, a law with teeth that passes to protect the rights of Black folks to vote, because they are being infringed on in many states. So I think there's so much to learn from John Lewis and from others, but I hope you guys will get something more from this podcast as we carry it on, and from this show. And we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks. Bye.